Welcome back, folks. Greg Silverman for CIOs and Bowties. I'm the CIO. I'll let you guess who's the bow tie.
On the bow tie. Good afternoon.
From the bow tie. Bow tie speaks. No, anyway, welcome to our second part of the CIOs and Bowties. It's been a while since we did a recording. I think we've all been very actively working and heads down. This next one is kind of interesting. I mean, it's very interesting and it's highly topical. And then you just get the title right. So, how one becomes liberal or conservative. So super interesting. We'll put the link to the article down below. I think it comes from Psychology Today or something. So really, not a financial article, but certainly, as we know, has a large financial bearing on one's approach to finances. So why don't you kind of set the scene for us, and then we'll get mucked in from there.
So this is fascinating, and clearly definition has a whole lot to play here. So we're just going to, in the broadest sense, whatever you feel a conservative is or whatever you feel a liberal is, just keep that in mind with regards to this discussion. You know, liberals in one society are very different to liberals in the other. Conservatives in one society are very different to conservatives in another society. But we're getting the gist of what we're trying to discuss here. And it would seem, Greg, according to those that have done the studies, not Greg or I might add, that genetics and experiences all play a part. There might be different weightings in terms of what they do, and even our hereditary makeup affects the way we might or might not think about our liberal and conservative viewpoints.
Yeah. So the one interesting aspect is this article says 40% of your, I guess 40% of your, how do I put this? 40% of the decision to be liberal or conservative is dictated by your genetics, which is kind of fascinating in of itself, right? Because what it's saying is, regardless of where you parachute in or where you're born or exist, your genes, somehow influence nearly half of your decision to be a liberal or a conservative. Some of the others which make sense to me are, your peer group. There's a discussion of what they call an ideological bubble. So we tend to form these peer groups that really have agree with our views, and we got this ideological bubble around us.
And those environments, pardon me for interrupting you, Greg.
No.
Those environments become self-fulfilling, by the way, because if you surround yourself with a group of people who have a viewpoint, a similar viewpoint about a particular topic, the probabilities are enormous that you're going to align yourself with that viewpoint. If that's where you hang, that's what you talk about, and it's going to be very unusual that you shouldn't disagree with a group of people that you've aligned yourself with that have a similar viewpoint to one another.
Yeah. So let's do a little definitional work, okay? And I don't know what this means. It might be Freudian, but I didn't take out the definition of a liberal from the article. I took out a definition of a conservative, right? And it says a conservative leaning person, that's my words, not the article, requires more security, more stability, more predictability, and more authority than their liberal counterparts. What do you think of that?
Fascinating. And I might tend to disagree somewhat, because I think at the fringes, everything becomes a little bit haywire, and authority plays less and less of a role on both fringes. So I'm not sure I would agree with that in its entirety, but certainly perhaps more structure. I'm one of those people, hashtag embrace change. You've all heard, those of you that heard me before.
So that would make you liberal, is that right? A flaming liberal.
I guess by that definition, that would make me liberal. The other side of that argument, by the way, Greg, is I do believe I'm a liberal and a conservative. There are certain aspects in life where I, in my opinion, have liberal viewpoints, and there are aspects of my life where I have conservative viewpoints. So,
yeah. Well,
once again, back to those definitions.
The well-worn phrase is socially liberal but fiscally conservative.
Conservative. Right. Yeah. Perhaps, yes, indeed. And but I have to say, I'm an older man than you are, and we both lived on various continents, which I think in and of itself has impacted the way you and I think. And there's no question, as compared to someone that might not have traveled as much, you're going to have a broader viewpoint. You're going to have come into contact with more differentiating points of view than others might or might not have.
Right.
And with that being said, I know that I was very, very influenced by my family life as a young man. Then school in American parlance, or university in British parlance or English parlance, really had an impact on the way I thought from a political perspective, more so than from a financial perspective. And then fast forward many years, my oldest child has had the biggest impact on my social viewpoints, more so than anyone else in my life. So we are impacted at all times in our life, you would think, unless you're so stuck in your ways that you refuse to learn and change. But that's fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. So you and I both went to the same college, albeit at separate decades. Just kidding. Probably not. But for the listeners, our college was basically the hotbed of anti-apartheid action, or what do you call it? Protest, right?
The anti-apartheid movement and protest.
Yeah. So we went to a college which I guess would be seen as highly liberal, extremely liberal from a political point of view, although the whole context is very different. What I did notice about myself is I probably became more liberal during my college years, I guess, because there is less structure, less predictability, less authority, right? And then moving to Georgia, which I could posit is probably a little bit more of a conservative society than other places I've lived. And so I find myself, leaning a little bit maybe more conservative. Let's call it fiscally conservative, socially liberal. And then as you get older, as you said, as you have children, you have family and extensions of yourself, I guess you can become a bit more conservative or authoritarian, or wanting a bit more control, maybe certainly over your kids.
Yep. Well, I mean, my lesson would be there is you've got to learn to let go. Have to. It's not fair to your children if you don't. But that's a personal opinion, obviously. Yeah. And so of course, they need guidance and direction. That goes without saying.
Yeah, and they need a lot of that. So the other two we didn't really mention, and I'll leave it with you. So the one is other influences of if you lean liberal, conservative, the media, and your spiritual upbringing, which I guess it identifies as spiritual in the article. I suspect what they're really referring to is your religion.
You're religious, I think. Yes, they were being a little politically correct there. I agree with you.
Yeah. So any comments around media? I mean, that's just a hot button item, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and especially once again for those of us living in the US, it's clear that the left-leaning media are in charge in terms of delivering a message. The conservative media is much less influential, and particularly from a social networking and the social platforms on our on modern media. There's no question
as opposed to the Silicon Valley platform.
Exactly. We only have to look at what's happening with Facebook and the erstwhile whistleblower that was on television stations yesterday morning. No question that the media plays a very important role and can be very influential as to a society's thinking. No doubt about it. And religion, yes, I mean it's very, very hard to break away if you're a regular attendee of any religious gathering. It's very difficult highly to break away from those viewpoints. Very highly structured. There you go. Back to that.
So
you mentioned that earlier.
Dave, let's end this section on and let's just make it a bit more relevant again. One would say, I'll throw this out, and I would say, well, it's probably good to be conservative as an investor. Right, it's probably good because you don't take on too much debt, and you don't take too much risk. Yet, if you look at, and this kind of flows into our next section, but you look at the complete disregard for the level of debt in the United States. I mean, that's not a conservative view that we have on debt over here. It's almost as if being conservative financially might be the best way to go about investing.
I think you have to differentiate in your previous comment, Greg, with regard to this debt that we've accumulated. The American household is actually is in a better position from a debt perspective today than it was 18 months ago. It's not in a better position today than it was 2 months ago, but it is in a much better position today than it was 18 months ago. So from an individual perspective, individual investors are cognizant of the fact and are perhaps more conservative from an investment perspective. This large reliance on debt is really coming from Washington, D.C., from the central planners and the like.
But hang on, let me challenge that for a second, because
please.
You often read these articles, and I don't have one to cite, unfortunately, right here. But we are led to believe by the media that the average American is not saved enough for retirement. That they're going to have to work until they 70 something, way beyond the kind of retirement age, and just not fiscally, prepared for what's coming. So is that just a media bias, or is that really true?
This really, no. I think it's really true. The difference in terms of what I'm discussing and what you're alluding to here is that the average investor in America is not most of America, unfortunately. There is an enormous wealth gap, and it's growing and growing and growing each and every day. A large contributor to that growing wealth gap has been our central planners, our central bank, starting with Ben Bernanke, followed by Janet Yellen, and then Powell under both Trump and under Biden. And they made the rich very rich and the extremely wealthy unbelievably wealthy. Asset prices have increased enormously with this money printing, with quantitative easing and its follow-on strategies. Whereas most of America has not been able to participate in this. So I think it's two different things here. Most Americans do not invest, end of story. They've never been in a position to, and they don't. Yeah.
Okay, so you know the old saying, for a carpenter, everything looks like a nail. For an economist like our David Crook, everything looks like printing too much money, right?
Yes, indeed. I won't shy away from that.
The heroine of overprinting.
Right.
So folks, bear with us. That's kind of a quasi introduction to our next section 3 of the CIOs and Bowties. We're going to talk about the demise of fiat currencies. We'll discuss what fiat actually is, and what the biggest threats behind that is. So bear with us, and we'll be back in a few minutes for part 3 of CIOs and Bowties.